The Shadow of Black Magic, a horror story from America. Part 1, The Mysterious Town of Hollow Creek. In the Appalachian Mountains, nestled deep within the dense forests of West Virginia, lay a small, isolated town called Hollow Creek. The town was known for its quiet, picturesque setting, but it harbored a dark history that few spoke of, even fewer acknowledged. The residents, mostly farmers and artisans, kept to themselves, avoiding outsiders at all costs. The local legend was simple yet chilling: do not disturb the forest, and the forest will not disturb you. The forest surrounding Hollow Creek was ancient, its trees twisted and gnarled, with a heavy mist that never seemed to lift. Old stories passed down through generations spoke of strange happenings, of inexplicable disappearances, and of a long-forgotten witch who had once lived in the woods. But for newcomers, it all seemed like folklore, until one fateful day, when a group of college students stumbled upon the town. Part 2, The Stranger's Arrival. Among the group was Emily, an ambitious archaeology student fascinated by ancient rituals and superstitions. After hearing a rumor about a witch's curse tied to the land, she convinced her friends to visit Hollow Creek for a research project on the town's history. They were drawn to the eerie, isolated town and the promise of discovering something truly unique. Upon their arrival, the locals gave them a cold welcome, warning them not to wander into the woods. But Emily was undeterred. She was certain that she could uncover secrets that had remained hidden for centuries. One afternoon, while exploring the outskirts of the town, Emily discovered an old, abandoned house on the edge of the forest. The house was decrepit, its windows shattered and doors rotting away. But inside, there was something far more disturbing. At the center of the room, she found an old wooden altar covered in dark symbols. Nearby, there were remnants of old ritualistic tools, a blood-stained knife, strange herbs, and jars filled with unknown substances. It was clear that this was no ordinary house. Emily's excitement grew. She began to research the symbols and artifacts, determined to unravel the mystery. But as she did, a strange feeling settled over her, a sense of being watched, a cold weight on her chest, and strange whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Part 3, The Awakening. Late one night, Emily stayed behind after her friends had gone to bed, too absorbed in her research to notice the time. As she traced her fingers over the ancient symbols on the altar, her hand accidentally knocked over a small jar, spilling a dark liquid onto the floor. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, like distant voices calling her name. Suddenly, a deep, guttural voice echoed in her mind, "You have awakened the curse." Emily jumped back, her heart pounding. She glanced around the room, but there was no one there. The whispers became louder, more urgent. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and move. The room felt alive, as if the very walls were closing in on her. Frantically, Emily grabbed her notes and rushed back to the town, shaken and terrified. But when she arrived at her friend's cabin, something was wrong. The door was ajar, and the inside was eerily quiet. Her friends, who had been laughing and joking only hours before, were now silent, their eyes wide with terror. They sat frozen, staring at something only they could see. Emily tried to speak, but her voice was trapped in her throat. She noticed something chilling: the air around them seemed to shimmer, and the room felt impossibly cold. The shadows in the corners were growing darker, moving toward her friends as if they were alive. One of her friends, Chris, whispered with a trembling voice, "We shouldn't have come here. We shouldn't have awakened it." Part 4, The Witch's Curse. As Emily tried to calm her friends, the darkness in the room thickened. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as if something malevolent was entering their space. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the doorway, tall, shrouded in a black cloak, with piercing, glowing eyes. It was the Witch of Hollow Creek. Her name was Margaret Blackthorne, and she had been the one to curse the land centuries ago. Margaret had practiced dark magic in secret, using forbidden rituals to summon creatures from beyond, bind souls to her will, and manipulate the forces of nature. But her greed for power had eventually led to her downfall. She had tried to bind herself to the land, to never age and never die, but the ritual went wrong, and she had been trapped between life and death, her soul tethered to the forest, waiting for someone to disturb the ancient altar. And now, Emily had done just that. Margaret's voice was a low, rasping whisper. "You've disturbed my resting place. Now, you will pay the price." With a wave of her hand, the air grew even colder. The shadows in the room twisted and morphed, taking the shape of monstrous creatures, their glowing red eyes fixed on Emily and her friends. They could hear the sound of claws scraping against the walls, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The creatures growled, their presence filling the room with an unbearable sense of dread. Part 5, The Bargain. The witch's laughter echoed through the room as the shadows closed in. Emily felt her limbs growing heavy, her body frozen with fear. But amidst the terror, she remembered the old journal she had found in the abandoned house. In the back of her mind, she recalled a passage that mentioned a bargain, a way to break the curse. She summoned every ounce of courage she had left and shouted, "I know how to stop you. I know the ritual." Margaret's eyes glowed with an unholy fire. "You think you can stop me?" she hissed. "There is no escaping me. You have already awakened the curse, and now it will consume you." But Emily was determined. She began chanting the words from the journal, using the very magic that had bound Margaret to the land. The air in the room swirled, crackling with energy, as Emily's voice grew stronger. Margaret screamed in fury, her form flickering like a flame. "You cannot break the curse. You belong to me now." With one final chant, Emily forced her will upon the darkness. The shadows screeched and writhed, but slowly, they began to dissipate. The witch let out a final, blood-curdling scream before vanishing into the air, leaving only silence behind. Part 6, The Aftermath. The next morning, Emily and her friends woke up to find themselves safe, alive, but forever changed. The witch's curse had been lifted, but the toll had been great. The forest no longer felt oppressive, but the air still carried a lingering darkness. The town of Hollow Creek, which had once been silent, seemed to hold its breath, as if the land itself was waiting for something else to awaken. Though they had survived, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret Blackthorn's spirit had not been fully vanquished. She had broken the curse, but had she truly freed the town? Or had she only delayed the inevitable? The shadow of black magic still loomed over Hollow Creek, and Emily knew that, one day, it would return. The Curse of the Black Sorceress. Part 1, The Arrival. In the early 1900s, the small town of Ashford in rural Maine had always been a place of peace, with its cobbled streets, picturesque houses, and a tight-knit community. However, there were whispers about the Hollow, a dense forest that bordered the town. Locals often avoided it, telling tales of shadows that moved unnaturally, of eerie sounds that drifted through the trees at night, and most of all, of Lydia Ravenwood, a woman rumored to have practiced black magic in the darkest corners of the woods. It was said that Lydia had been a healer once, beloved by the people of Ashford. But after the sudden and inexplicable death of her young daughter, people began to suspect her of witchcraft. Whispers turned to accusations, and soon Lydia found herself outcast, blamed for a death that no one could explain. In desperation, Lydia turned to the darkest of magics, seeking a way to bring her daughter back from the dead. The legend claimed that in her grief, she made a terrible pact with an ancient evil that resided in the forest. In exchange for her soul, she was promised the power to resurrect the dead. However, the spell went horribly wrong, and instead of bringing her daughter back, Lydia unleashed something far more sinister, an ancient spirit bound to the forest, a spirit that would grow stronger with every soul it claimed. As the years passed, Lydia was never seen again, but the people of Ashford knew she was still out there, haunting the forest, forever tied to the curse she had created. Part 2, The Stranger. Fast forward to the 1930s. A man named Jonathan Clark, a historian with a particular interest in folklore and the occult, found himself traveling through New England, researching ancient rituals and their ties to the land. His fascination with the supernatural had led him to Ashford, after hearing about Lydia Ravenwood and the mysterious events surrounding her disappearance. Jonathan arrived on a crisp autumn day, the air filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. He immediately sought out the local library, hoping to find old records about the Ravenwood family and their connection to the forest. The librarian, an elderly woman named Miss Hawthorne, was the first to warn him. "You've come to study the Ravenwood curse, haven't you?" she asked, her voice filled with apprehension. "It's dangerous to delve into things that should be left alone." Jonathan, eager for knowledge, brushed off her warnings, believing it to be superstition. He was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with a series of old books and maps, he ventured into the forest the very next day. Part 3. Into the Hollow. The forest was unnaturally quiet as Jonathan ventured deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted limbs blocking out the sun. The further he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. There was a strange energy in the air, and Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. After hours of wandering, he stumbled upon an ancient stone structure, half consumed by ivy and moss. It was a ruined altar, stained with what looked like dried blood. This was where Lydia had performed her dark rituals, Jonathan realized. He set up camp nearby, determined to explore the altar further the next morning. That night, as he lay by his fire, he heard it, a soft whisper, almost like a distant voice. He strained his ears, but couldn't make out the words. It sounded as though it was coming from all directions. Then, suddenly, the whisper turned into a low, guttural growl. His heart raced as the temperature around him dropped, and the air became thick with an unsettling presence. Out of the corner of his eye, Jonathan saw a shadow dart between the trees. It was fast, unnaturally so. He stood up quickly, his breath now visible in the cold air. The whispering grew louder, turning into a chant, a dark incantation that made his skin crawl. Then he saw her, Lydia Ravenwood. She was standing at the edge of the firelight, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Her clothes were torn, and her hair hung in long, wet strands. She was no longer the woman from the town stories, she was something else, something far darker. "You shouldn't have come here, Jonathan Clark," Lydia's voice echoed, sending chills down his spine. "You are already mine." Before Jonathan could react, the ground beneath him cracked open, and skeletal hands reached up from the earth. He stumbled backward, but his feet caught in the roots of the trees, pulling him deeper into the forest. Part 4. The Curse. Lydia approached him, her face twisted with sorrow and rage. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "But the magic took control. I tried to bring her back, my daughter, but instead, I unleashed a horror that never should have been set free." Jonathan's heart raced as Lydia knelt beside him. "The spirit, it grows stronger with every life it claims. I couldn't stop it. I thought if I made a deal with it, it would save me. But I was wrong. Now, it will consume everyone." With that, Lydia placed her cold, trembling hand on Jonathan's chest. He felt a sharp pain, like ice piercing through his body, and then, nothing. Part 5. The Forest Awaits. Jonathan awoke to find himself lying on the cold, damp ground, the sun barely rising through the canopy above. The whispers were gone, and Lydia was no longer in sight. The air felt unnervingly still, as though the forest had forgotten him, forgotten everyone. But as he stumbled to his feet, he saw the forest in a new light. The trees seemed to be watching him, their dark branches twisting and moving in the wind. And in the distance, he heard it, the faint sound of chanting, a voice that was both familiar and foreign. Jonathan realized with a jolt that the curse had not ended with Lydia. It had passed to him. The spirit, bound to the forest by black magic, had claimed another soul. And now, it would never let him go. As he walked away from the altar, the forest seemed to close in on him, its shadows stretching toward him like fingers. The whispers grew louder, and Jonathan knew that he would never escape. The curse of Lydia Ravenwood had taken him, just as it had taken so many before him. And the forest would never forget. The Curse of Black Hollow. Part 1, The Arrival in Black Hollow. In the deep, foggy woods of Black Hollow, a small town nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, the locals always spoke in hushed tones about the strange happenings that occurred after sunset. The town had always been a quiet place, but there was an unsettling history to it, one that involved whispers of black magic, rituals, and disappearances. It was in 1947 when Lily Thornton, a young journalist from New York City, found herself drawn to Black Hollow. Her fascination with the occult and her ambition to write a sensational article on strange happenings in America led her to the secluded town. The locals were wary of outsiders, but Lily was persistent. She had heard the stories about the witch trials that took place centuries ago, the ancient rituals conducted in the forest, and the family at the heart of it all, the Ravenswood family. The Ravenswoods had lived in Black Hollow for generations, and with them came a dark reputation. The head of the family, Abigail Ravenswood, was rumored to have been a practitioner of black magic. Stories claimed she had made a pact with an ancient entity, gaining power and wealth in exchange for souls. Her house, an imposing mansion on the outskirts of town, had remained abandoned for years, but people still spoke of the strange, eerie glow that sometimes emanated from the windows at night. Lily was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with her notebook and a camera, she ventured to the Ravenswood mansion, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. Part 2, The Discovery. The mansion stood as a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. Its windows were cracked, and ivy crawled up its decaying walls. As Lily approached, she noticed the air growing colder. The closer she got, the more she felt an eerie presence, like something was watching her, something ancient and malevolent. Inside, the mansion was even more unsettling. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. The floorboards creaked under her feet as she moved cautiously through the house. She found remnants of strange symbols carved into the walls and floorboards, and the further she ventured, the more she felt an oppressive force, as if the house itself was alive, breathing. In the basement, Lily discovered an altar, large and ominous, with strange markings etched into the stone. At the center of the altar was an old book, its pages yellowed and brittle. On the cover was a symbol she had seen before in her research, the sigil of an ancient demon. Lily's pulse quickened as she flipped open the book. It was written in a language she could not understand, filled with incantations and rituals. But what caught her attention was a name, Abigail Ravenswood. It seemed as though Abigail had performed rituals to summon dark forces and make deals with them, selling her soul, and perhaps the souls of others, in exchange for power. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and Lily felt the unmistakable sensation of being surrounded by someone. She turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure, tall, thin, and draped in tattered black robes. The face was obscured by a hood, but Lily could feel its eyes on her. "Leave this place," the figure asked, its voice like the creaking of old wood. "The curse of Black Hollow is not meant for you." Lily's heart raced. "Who are you?" she whispered, but the figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a hand, pointing at her. With a burst of fear, Lily turned and ran, but as she reached the door, she felt an icy grip on her ankle. It was as though the house itself was trying to hold her there. She struggled, managing to free herself, and bolted out of the mansion, never once looking back. Part 3, The Curse Unleashed. Lily fled to the local inn, shaken and terrified. She tried to tell the innkeeper what had happened, but he just shook his head, his face pale. You should never have gone there, he muttered. The Ravenswood curse, it's real. And now, you've opened the door. That night, as Lily lay in bed, she could hear strange noises, scraping sounds from the walls, whispers in the wind. The air felt thick and suffocating. She tried to sleep, but the images from the mansion haunted her, the dark figure, the ritual book, the sinister presence that lingered in the air. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. Lily began to feel strange, dizzy, nauseous, as though something was draining her energy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her, watching her every move. When she looked in the mirror, her reflection seemed distorted, her eyes were darker, her face paler, and there was an unnatural shadow behind her. In the days that followed, the town of Black Hollow seemed to change. People who had once been kind to Lily now avoided her, their eyes filled with fear. Children whispered and pointed when she passed by. The townspeople seemed to know something she didn't. Desperate for answers, Lily sought out the town's oldest resident, Miss Harriet, a woman who had lived through the original witch trials and knew the town's darkest secrets. "You've unleashed the curse," Miss Harriet explained with a tremble in her voice. "The Ravenswoods were cursed long ago. They made a deal with an entity from the other side, an ancient spirit who feeds on fear, souls, and suffering. Abigail Ravenswood's pact bound the demon to this place, and anyone who dares to meddle with the Ravenswood house becomes part of the curse." Lily was horrified. She had become part of something much darker than she ever imagined. The town, the mansion, the entire area was now doomed to suffer the consequences of the ancient ritual. The demon would grow stronger with each passing day, feeding on the fear and despair of its victims. Part 4. The Final Ritual. With no way to escape, Lily realized the only way to break the curse was to confront the demon and destroy the Book of Rituals. Armed with only the knowledge she had gained, she returned to the Ravenswood mansion one final time, her heart pounding in her chest. The mansion seemed alive now, its shadows twisting and reaching for her. As she descended into the basement once more, the altar was waiting, just as it had been when she first arrived. But this time, the dark figure stood at its center, its eyes glowing red. "You should have stayed away, Lily Thornton," the demon's voice echoed, its form shifting into something unrecognizable. It was massive, a shadow made of nightmares, its form made of writhing darkness. Lily's only choice was to destroy the book, to end the curse once and for all. She grabbed the book, her hands trembling, and with all her strength, she threw it into the fire that burned in the hearth. As the flames consumed the book, the demon let out a horrible scream that echoed through the mansion. But it wasn't over. The ground beneath her feet shook violently, and the walls cracked open, revealing glimpses of the horrors trapped inside. The mansion began to collapse, its dark energy fighting to stay alive. As Lily ran, she could feel the weight of the curse lifting, but it was a close call. She barely escaped the mansion as it crumbled to the ground. The curse of Black Hollow had been broken, but at a great cost. Epilogue. Years later, Lily returned to New York, never speaking of the events that transpired in Black Hollow. But she knew one thing for sure: the curse of the Ravenswoods had not just been a myth. It was real, and she had nearly become its latest victim. The mansion, of course, was gone, reduced to rubble. But some say that on certain nights, if you're standing on the outskirts of Black Hollow, you can still hear whispers carried by the wind, whispers of the ancient demon that once ruled the land, waiting for someone foolish enough to reopen the door. "You've unleashed the curse," Miss Harriet explained with a tremble in her voice. "The Ravenswoods were cursed long ago. They made a deal with an entity from the other side, an ancient spirit who feeds on fear, souls, and suffering. Abigail Ravenswood's pact bound the demon to this place, and anyone who dares to meddle with the Ravenswood house becomes part of the curse." Lily was horrified. She had become part of something much darker than she ever imagined. The town, the mansion, the entire area was now doomed to suffer the consequences of the ancient ritual. The demon would grow stronger with each passing day, feeding on the fear and despair of its victims. Part 4. The Final Ritual. With no way to escape, Lily realized the only way to break the curse was to confront the demon and destroy the Book of Rituals. Armed with only the knowledge she had gained, she returned to the Ravenswood mansion one final time, her heart pounding in her chest. The mansion seemed alive now, its shadows twisting and reaching for her. As she descended into the basement once more, the altar was waiting, just as it had been when she first arrived. But this time, the dark figure stood at its center, its eyes glowing red. "You should have stayed away, Lily Thornton," the demon's voice echoed, its form shifting into something unrecognizable. It was massive, a shadow made of nightmares, its form made of writhing darkness. Lily's only choice was to destroy the book, to end the curse once and for all. She grabbed the book, her hands trembling, and with all her strength, she threw it into the fire that burned in the hearth. As the flames consumed the book, the demon let out a horrible scream that echoed through the mansion. But it wasn't